Before we begin, write in the comments which city and country you're watching us from. This channel exists to record stories that should never have been forgotten. The winter of 1874 arrived in Richmond, Virginia, with a bitterness that seemed to reflect the mood of the defeated South. 9 years had passed since the Confederacy's surrender. 9 years since the end of slavery, yet the city still carried the scars of war. Burned-out buildings standing like broken teeth along streets where federal occupation troops still patrolled. The Reconstruction era had brought legal freedom to 4 million formerly enslaved people, but freedom on paper translated imperfectly into reality. The air in Richmond that winter carried coal smoke, industrial grime, and the tension of a society struggling to redefine itself while half its population resisted that redefinition with every tool available. In the archives of the Virginia Historical Society, there exists a letter dated January 14, 1874, written by a white schoolteacher named Margaret Ashford to her sister in Philadelphia. The letter begins with typical correspondence about weather and health before taking an unexpected turn. I must tell you about something that occurred this week at the Freedman School, where I volunteer 3 afternoons per week. You know, I teach basic arithmetic and reading to former slaves, most of them adults who were denied education during their bondage. The work is rewarding, though the students progress slowly, as one would expect from those learning letters for the first time in middle age. But yesterday, a young Negro man entered the classroom. His name is Isaac Turner, age approximately 22 years, formerly enslaved on a tobacco plantation in Henrico County. He had heard we offered free instruction and wished to learn to read and write, as he hopes to find work beyond manual labor. I assigned him to the beginners group and provided him with a slate and primer. Within 20 minutes, he had completed every exercise in the beginner's text. I assumed he had somehow learned his letters previously, perhaps in secret during slavery. Such cases are not unknown. I gave him the intermediate text. He completed it in an hour. By the end of the afternoon, he had worked through materials that typically require 6 months of study. But Sarah, that was not what unsettled me. When the arithmetic lesson began, I was teaching the class simple addition, sums no greater than 20. Isaac watched for perhaps 5 minutes, then approached my desk and asked if I had any real mathematics he could study. I was taken aback by his phrasing. I showed him a geometry text I use with advanced students, thinking to humble him. He opened to a page on Euclidean proofs and began solving problems I myself struggle with. Then he pointed to the diagram and said, "This is beautiful, ma'am, but it's incomplete. Euclid worked in 2 dimensions mostly, but the same principles extend into 3 dimensions and beyond. If you apply these theorems to solid geometry, you can calculate volumes and surface areas that..." And then he proceeded to describe mathematical concepts I have never encountered in any text. I asked where he learned these things. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as apologetic and said, "I don't rightly know, ma'am. I just see numbers in my head. They make patterns. I follow the patterns and they lead to answers. Sometimes I see things that haven't been built yet, machines, buildings, bridges, and I understand how they work, how the forces balance, how the materials need to be arranged. I thought everyone saw things this way until I realized other folks couldn't. Sarah, I have been teaching for 15 years. I have encountered bright students before. This was something different. This was not mere intelligence, but something I lacked the vocabulary to properly categorize. I sent him away with an advanced mathematics text and told him to return next week. I confess I am both fascinated and inexplicably unsettled. Margaret Ashford's letter represents the first documented encounter with Isaac Turner that survives in the historical record, but it would not be the last. Over the following months, Turner's name would appear in an increasingly diverse array of documents: school records, newspaper articles, patent applications, personal correspondence, and eventually Jing Cha reports and legal filings. creating a fragmentary portrait of a man whose abilities seem to exceed the boundaries of what should have been possible for someone of his background and era. Isaac Turner was born into slavery sometime around 1852 on the Whitfield Plantation in Henrico County, Virginia, approximately 15 miles from Richmond. The plantation records, which survived the war and are now housed at the Virginia State Archives, list his birth only as Negro boy born to Sadie tobacco fields, summer 1852, no date recorded. His father was never documented, likely sold away before Isaac's birth, a common practice that deliberately fragmented enslaved families. The conditions of Turner's childhood can be reconstructed from the general historical record of Virginia tobacco plantations and the specific records of the Whitfield estate. He would have begun working in the tobacco fields by age 6 or 7, performing simple tasks like pulling worms from plants. By adolescence, he would have been doing the backbreaking work of harvesting, curing, and processing tobacco. The Whitfield Plantation was a medium-sized operation with approximately 40 enslaved workers, strict discipline, and an owner, Josiah Whitfield, who adhered to the common belief that educating enslaved persons was both illegal and dangerous. Yet somehow, despite these circumstances, Isaac Turner emerged from slavery with capabilities that suggested extensive education in mathematics, engineering, and physics, subjects he could not possibly have studied. The Emancipation Proclamation reached Virginia in stages, with full implementation coming only after the war's end in 1865. Isaac would have been approximately 13 years old at emancipation. Like many newly freed people, he continued working on the Whitfield Plantation for several years as a sharecropper, nominally free but economically bound to the same land, the same labor, under only slightly different terms. It was not until late 1873, at age 21, that Turner made his way to Richmond seeking education and opportunity. What makes Turner's case particularly remarkable is that there is no evidence he received any formal education during the 8 years between emancipation and his appearance at Margaret Ashford's school. Freedmen's schools did exist in rural Henrico County, but plantation records and local school registries contain no mention of Isaac Turner's attendance. He simply appeared in Richmond in January 1874, claiming he could not read or write, yet demonstrating mathematical understanding that exceeded what most university-educated men possessed. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, do you believe genius can emerge without any education, or must knowledge always have a source? Margaret Ashford was not the only person to document Turner's extraordinary abilities in those early weeks. On January 23, 1874, Professor Edmund Hartley of Richmond College, a small institution that had recently begun admitting its first black students under Reconstruction policies, received a visit from a colleague who taught at the Freedmen's School. The colleague brought Isaac Turner. Professor Hartley's diary entry from that day is preserved in the Richmond College archives. I was asked to evaluate a young Negro freedman who supposedly demonstrates remarkable mathematical aptitude. I confess I approached this meeting with skepticism. In my experience, enthusiasm for natural genius among the formerly enslaved often amounts to basic literacy being mistaken for brilliance by those unaccustomed to seeing Negroes educated at all. What I encountered was something entirely different. I began with simple problems to establish his baseline abilities. He solved them instantly. I progressed to algebra. He handled it effortlessly. I moved to calculus, differential equations I used to challenge my advanced students. He solved them mentally without paper, showing his work only when I insisted on seeing his reasoning. His methodology was sound, his answers correct. Then I presented him with a problem I had been struggling with myself, an engineering calculation involving load distribution across an arched bridge design. The mathematics involved are complex, requiring integration of multiple variables and understanding of both material stress and geometric principles. Turner studied the problem for perhaps 3 minutes, then began explaining the solution. But what struck me was not merely that he solved it, but how he described his thought process. He said, "Professor, I see the bridge in my mind. I see the forces moving through it, like water flowing through channels. The arch wants to spread at the base, so the weight has to be transferred just right, or it'll fail at the haunches. The mathematics just describes what I can already see happening." He then proceeded to calculate the exact load tolerances with a precision that matched my own calculations that had taken me several days to complete. I asked him about his education. He stated clearly that he had never attended school before this year, had never seen a mathematics text until 2 weeks ago, and could not read beyond a basic level. When I expressed disbelief, he became quietly insistent. "Sir, I'm not trying to deceive you. I don't understand it myself. I just always saw numbers and shapes in my head. When I was working in the tobacco fields, I'd calculate how many plants we could fit in different arrangements to maximize yield. I'd look at a barn and see how the weight was distributed through the frame. I'd watch a wagon wheel and understand the geometry that made it work. I thought this was normal, that everyone could see these things. It wasn't until I came to the school and saw people struggling with simple sums that I realized I was different. I subjected him to 2 more hours of increasingly difficult problems. He solved every one. I have no explanation for this. Either this young man received an extensive clandestine education that somehow went undocumented, which seems impossible given the circumstances of slavery, or we are witnessing a form of innate mathematical ability that challenges our understanding of how knowledge is acquired. I have agreed to allow him to audit my lectures, though his presence in the classroom will certainly raise eyebrows among the college administration and students. Professor Hartley's decision to allow Turner access to his classes proved controversial. Richmond College in 1874 was a predominantly white institution struggling with the social implications of Reconstruction-era integration. While federal policies mandated equal access to education, social resistance remained fierce. The presence of a black man in advanced mathematics courses, especially one whose abilities exceeded those of paying white students, created immediate tension. A letter from Richmond College President Dr. Howard Sinclair to the Board of Trustees, dated February 5, 1874, captures this tension. "I write to inform the board of a situation requiring guidance. Professor Hartley has taken it upon himself to admit a Negro freedman named Isaac Turner to audit his advanced mathematics courses. While I appreciate Professor Hartley's scientific curiosity and his commitment to evaluating merit without regard to race, principles I theoretically support, the practical implications are proving disruptive. Several students have complained about Turner's presence. More troubling, Turner's performance in class discussions has become a source of embarrassment to our paying students. On 3 occasions, Professor Hartley has presented complex problems that stumped the entire class, only to have Turner solve them immediately. This creates an untenable situation where white students who have paid substantial tuition find themselves intellectually surpassed by a Negro who attended class as a guest. Furthermore, rumors are spreading in Richmond that we are harboring a black prodigy who demonstrates impossible abilities. Such talk attracts attention we do not need. The college depends on tuition from Southern families who already view integration with suspicion. If word spreads that we are elevating a Negro above white students, regardless of merit, our enrollment will suffer. I am seeking the board's guidance on how to proceed. Do we ask Professor Hartley to discontinue Turner's attendance? Do we offer Turner formal admission, which would antagonize our donor base? Or do we find some middle path that preserves both scientific inquiry and social stability? The board's response, delivered on February 10th, advised President Sinclair to allow Turner to continue auditing classes, but to discourage public attention to his abilities. This compromise satisfied no one and lasted less than 3 weeks. On February 24th, 1874, an incident occurred that would make Isaac Turner's abilities impossible to ignore or contain. The Richmond Mechanics Institute was hosting a public exhibition of innovations and inventions, a common practice in the industrial era, allowing inventors and engineers to display their work to potential investors and the interested public. Among the exhibits was a new design for a steam engine governor, presented by a prominent Richmond engineer named Charles Whitmore. The governor was a mechanical device designed to regulate engine speed automatically, preventing dangerous overspeed conditions. Whitmore had been working on the design for 2 years and had obtained financial backing from several Richmond businessmen. Isaac Turner attended the exhibition, admitted as a member of the general public. According to multiple witness accounts, Turner spent several minutes examining Whitmore's governor, then approached the engineer and spoke to him privately. What he said is documented in a letter Whitmore wrote to his business partner that evening. The most extraordinary thing happened at today's exhibition. A young Negro man approached me and pointed out a critical flaw in our governor design. At first, I dismissed him. Who was he to critique 2 years of careful engineering? But he was insistent, so I allowed him to explain. He described in precise technical language how the centrifugal force calculations in my design were slightly off. He showed me, right there, using paper from my notebook, how at speeds approaching maximum load, the governor would overcorrect, creating oscillations that would worsen rather than stabilize the engine. He then sketched an alternative linkage arrangement that would solve the problem. I was stunned. Not only because he was correct, and he was, I verified his mathematics immediately, but because the flaw he identified was subtle enough that it would not have manifested until the engine was operating under conditions we had not yet tested. His correction would have saved us from a potential catastrophic failure that could have destroyed our reputation and killed someone. When I asked how he knew all this, he said he just saw it when he looked at the mechanism. He said he could visualize the forces and motions in his head, could see where the design would fail. I asked about his education and background. It turns out he is a former slave with no formal engineering training whatsoever. I don't know what to make of this. I should feel grateful, and I do, but I also feel something else, something like fear. How does a man with no education know things I spent years learning? What does it mean that this Negro can see engineering flaws I cannot? And if he can do this, what else can he do? Whitmore's letter circulated among Richmond's engineering community. Within days, other engineers and inventors began seeking out Isaac Turner, testing him with their own designs, presenting him with technical problems. In every case, Turner demonstrated the same uncanny ability to visualize mechanical systems, identify flaws, and propose solutions. A newspaper article from the Richmond Inquirer, dated March 8, 1874, documents the growing fascination. The Negro mathematical marvel, Friedman demonstrates extraordinary abilities. Richmond society has been abuzz with talk of Isaac Turner, a young Negro freedman who has demonstrated remarkable mathematical and mechanical abilities that have astonished educated men. Turner, formerly enslaved on a Henrico County plantation, possesses no formal education, yet solves complex engineering problems with apparent ease. Several prominent engineers and professors have tested Turner's abilities and confirmed them genuine. Professor Edmund Hartley of Richmond College states, "This young man's capabilities exceed those of my best students. I cannot explain how he acquired such knowledge, but the knowledge is undeniably present." Turner's case raises intriguing questions about the nature of intelligence and the capacity of the Negro race. While some view him as evidence that Negroes possess untapped intellectual potential, Others suggest he may be a singular anomaly, an exception that proves the general rule of racial difference. Still others whisper of more disturbing possibilities, though none will speak such speculation publicly. The article's final paragraph hints at the darker undercurrents beginning to swirl around Turner's growing reputation. In the context of 1874 Virginia, a society still reeling from military defeat, struggling with enforced racial integration and clinging to ideological justifications for the old order, a black man who demonstrated superior intellectual abilities represented more than a scientific curiosity. He represented a threat to the entire cognitive architecture that had justified slavery and continued to justify inequality. But Turner's abilities were about to manifest in a way that would transform general unease into something approaching panic. On March 15, 1874, Isaac Turner appeared at the United States Patent Office in Richmond, a local branch office where inventors could file patent applications. He carried with him detailed drawings for 3 separate inventions: an improved cotton gin mechanism, a new design for railway car couplings, and a telegraphic relay system that promised more efficient long-distance communication. The patent examiner who received these applications was a northern transplant named Robert Ferris, an engineer by training who had taken the position during Reconstruction. His report to the main patent office in Washington, D.C., dated March 18th, expresses both admiration and confusion. "I have examined 3 patent applications submitted by one Isaac Turner, a Negro freedman residing in Richmond. The applications demonstrate sophisticated understanding of mechanical principles and represent genuine innovations that could have commercial value. The cotton gin improvement is particularly clever. It modifies the existing design to process cotton more quickly while producing less fiber damage. The railway coupling design solves a significant safety problem that has caused numerous injuries to railway workers. The telegraphic relay could reduce signal degradation over long distances. However, I must note several irregularities. First, Turner claims he developed these inventions independently, yet they incorporate principles and techniques that suggest formal training in mechanical engineering, training he insists he never received. Second, when I questioned him closely about his design process, he stated that he visualizes machines in his mind and sees how forces interact in ways that allow him to design without extensive trial and error. Third, he appeared genuinely surprised when I told him his ideas were innovative, stating he assumed someone must have already thought of these things. I am forwarding the applications for approval as they meet all technical requirements, but I feel compelled to document the unusual circumstances surrounding their submission. If Turner is telling the truth about his background, and I have no reason to doubt him, then we are witnessing something extraordinary. A man with no formal education developing patentable inventions that required sophisticated engineering knowledge. The patent applications were approved on April 2, 1874. Isaac Turner became one of the few black inventors to receive U.S. patents in the immediate post-Civil War era. The achievement should have been celebrated as a triumph of post-emancipation opportunity, evidence that formerly enslaved persons could contribute to American innovation when given freedom and access. Instead, it triggered a backlash. On April 10, 1874, the Richmond Dispatch published an editorial that captured the resentment Turner's success had generated. Questions concerning the Negro Turner. Much has been made lately of the supposed inventive genius of the freedman Isaac Turner, who has recently received patents for various mechanical devices. While we do not dispute the Patent Office's judgment on the technical merits of these inventions, we feel compelled to raise questions that many citizens are asking privately. How does a former field slave, denied all education, suddenly emerge with knowledge equivalent to a trained engineer? Turner claims he is self-taught, that he visualizes solutions to complex problems without study or instruction. But is this plausible? Might there not be other explanations? Some suggest that Turner is fronting for white inventors who use him to claim Negro authorship for their own work, thereby profiting from sympathy for the freedmen. Others whisper darker possibilities, that Turner has somehow gained access to stolen technical documents, or that he represents some kind of northern conspiracy to elevate Negroes artificially as propaganda for radical reconstruction policies. We do not endorse such speculation, but we acknowledge that many reasonable people find Turner's story implausible. If he possesses the abilities attributed to him, he would be a singular exception among his race, an anomaly so rare as to be almost supernatural. And if his abilities are indeed supernatural in origin, ought we not consider what that implies? The editorial's final sentence gestured toward an accusation that others would state more explicitly, that Turner's knowledge came from demonic or occult sources. In the evangelical Protestant culture of the post-war South, such accusations carried serious implications. Reverend Thomas Aldridge, pastor of Richmond's largest Baptist church, delivered a sermon on April 14, 1874, that addressed Turner directly. A transcript preserved in the church archives shows Aldridge struggling to reconcile his Christian charity with his social conservatism. Brothers and sisters, we have heard much lately about the Negro Isaac Turner and his supposed gifts of invention and mathematical knowledge. Some celebrate him as evidence of Negro capacity. Others condemn him as a fraud, or worse. I wish to address this matter from a biblical perspective. The Scripture tells us that God distributes gifts as he sees fit, without regard to worldly station. It is possible, though highly unusual, that God might grant exceptional abilities to one of lowly birth, even to one of the Negro race. If Turner's gifts come from God, we should acknowledge them as evidence of divine grace. However, the Scripture also warns us of false gifts, of abilities granted by the enemy of souls to deceive and mislead. How are we to know the difference? I propose this test. Does Turner use his abilities to glorify God and uplift Christian virtue? Or does he use them to challenge the social order that God himself has ordained? Thus far, Turner has used his inventions merely for commercial gain and personal advancement. He has shown no particular reverence for the natural hierarchy that places the white race in authority over the Negro. In this, I see cause for concern. A truly godly man, gifted by divine grace, would demonstrate appropriate humility and deference. Turner's growing confidence, his willingness to correct and surpass white men in intellectual matters, this suggests pride, the sin that caused Lucifer's fall. I do not accuse Turner of conscious evil, but I urge caution. When the natural order is disrupted, when a Negro demonstrates abilities that surpass educated white men, we must ask, is this God's doing, or is it something else? Reverend Aldridge's sermon reflected the theological contortions required to explain Turner within the frameworks of 1874 Southern society. If Turner's abilities were genuine and natural, they challenged racial hierarchy. If they were gifts from God, they suggested God disapproved of that hierarchy. The only explanation that preserved the existing social order was that Turner's abilities came from some sinister source: fraud, theft, conspiracy, or the supernatural intervention of demonic forces. These accusations took on practical significance when, on April 20, 1874, the Richmond City Council convened a special hearing to investigate Isaac Turner. The stated purpose was to determine whether Turner's patent applications constituted fraud, whether he had stolen the ideas from white inventors and claimed them as his own. The hearing transcript, preserved in Richmond City archives, makes for disturbing reading. Turner was questioned for 3 hours by hostile council members who refused to accept that his abilities could be genuine. When he explained his design process, how he visualized machines mentally, tested them in his imagination, identified flaws without building physical prototypes. He was accused of lying or madness. Councilman Robert Thatcher's questions were particularly aggressive. "Mr. Turner, you ask us to believe that you, a Negro who spent your childhood picking tobacco, can solve engineering problems that stump men who studied at universities for years. You ask us to believe you invented 3 different devices without any formal training. This strains credibility beyond the breaking point. I put it to you directly. Who actually designed these inventions? What white man are you covering for?" Turner's response, as recorded in the transcript: "Sir, I understand why you find it hard to believe. I find it hard to believe myself sometimes. But I'm telling you the truth as I understand it. I see things in my mind, numbers, forces, mechanical relationships. I always have, even as a child. I didn't know it was unusual until I came to Richmond and saw that other people couldn't see these things. I'm not covering for anyone. These are my designs, born from my mind. If that makes me strange, then I'm strange. But I'm not a fraud." The hearing concluded with no formal charges. There was no actual evidence of fraud, and the Patent Office had already approved Turner's applications. But the investigation served its purpose. It put Turner on notice that his success would be scrutinized, challenged, and resisted at every turn. The message was clear. A black man who claimed intellectual superiority would not be tolerated, regardless of evidence. Yet Turner's abilities continued to manifest in ways that made them impossible to ignore. On May 3, 1874, a structural failure occurred at the Richmond Iron Works, a major industrial facility on the James River. A steam-powered crane used to move heavy iron plates collapsed suddenly, killing 1 worker and seriously injuring 3 others. The crane had been inspected and certified safe just weeks before. The failure shocked the engineering community and raised questions about industrial safety standards. Isaac Turner, who had taken employment as a draftsman at a smaller metalworking shop, heard about the collapse and wrote a letter to the ironworks superintendent, explaining what had gone wrong. His letter, dated May 5, 1874, is preserved in the Ironworks Accident Investigation File. "Sir, I read about the crane collapse in the newspaper, and I believe I know what caused it. I never seen your particular crane, but from the description of the failure and the crane's specifications published in the article, I can tell you what happened. The problem wasn't the main support beam, which everyone is assuming failed. The problem was metal fatigue in the coupling mechanism that connected the lifting chain to the crane arm. That coupling undergoes cyclic stress. Every time the crane lifts and lowers, the metal flexes slightly with each cycle. Over thousands of cycles, microscopic cracks form and propagate until the metal suddenly fails, even though it still looks fine on the surface. This is called fatigue failure. It's different from regular structural failure. You can inspect the metal and it looks perfect right up until it breaks. The only way to prevent it is to replace high-stress components before they accumulate too many cycles, or to redesign the coupling to distribute stress more evenly. If you examine the failed coupling, you'll find a fracture surface that looks crystalline or grainy, different from a normal break. That's the signature of fatigue failure. I'm certain this is what happened. I know you don't know me, and you got no reason to trust me. But if I'm right, you need to inspect all your other cranes for the same problem before someone else gets killed. Respectfully, Isaac Turner." The ironworks superintendent, a Scotsman named Andrew McGregor, who had trained as an engineer in Glasgow, was initially inclined to dismiss Turner's letter until he examined the failed coupling and found exactly what Turner had described. McGregor's report to the Ironworks Board of Directors, dated May 12th, expresses his astonishment. Turner was precisely correct. The failure was caused by metal fatigue in the coupling mechanism. The fracture surface shows the characteristic crystalline structure he predicted. Moreover, his explanation of the failure mechanism demonstrates understanding of metallurgy and materials science that I myself only acquired through years of formal study and practical experience. When I contacted Turner to ask how he diagnosed the failure without examining the crane, he explained that he visualized the forces acting on the coupling thousands of times over, saw where the stress concentrated, and understood that repeated stress weakens metal over time, even when single applications don't. He described this as obvious once you think about it. Gentlemen, this Negro has no formal engineering education. He has worked as a draftsman for less than 2 months. Yet he correctly diagnosed a failure mode that our certified engineers missed. I am forced to conclude either that Turner is a genius of extraordinary caliber, or that something deeply unusual is occurring that I lack the framework to explain. I have taken the liberty of hiring Turner as a consultant to inspect our other equipment. His fee is modest, and if his diagnoses prevent even one additional death, the expense is justified. I recognize this decision may prove controversial, but I place safety above social convention. McGregor's decision to hire Turner publicly and to praise his abilities in writing made him an anomaly among Richmond's white business class. Most employers, even those who recognized Turner's value, preferred to consult him privately without advertising their reliance on a black man's expertise. McGregor's forthright acknowledgement of Turner's superior knowledge marked him as either admirably principled or dangerously naive, depending on one's perspective. For Turner, the Ironworks consultation provided income and validation, but it also increased his visibility at a time when visibility was becoming dangerous. By summer of 1874, Isaac Turner's reputation had spread beyond Richmond. He began receiving letters from inventors, engineers, and industrialists across Virginia, and even from neighboring states, asking him to review designs, solve technical problems, and consult on projects. Some offered payment, others sought free advice. Still others seemed motivated primarily by curiosity about the Negro prodigy everyone was discussing. A letter from a Baltimore shipbuilder named Ernst Hoffman, dated June 18, 1874, is typical. Mr. Turner, I have heard remarkable things about your abilities and wish to test them myself. I enclose a technical drawing of a new hull design I am developing for steam-powered cargo vessels. The design incorporates a modified bow shape intended to reduce water resistance. However, my initial calculations suggest the design may be unstable in heavy seas. I would value your assessment. Please review the drawings and provide your honest opinion. I've been designing ships for 20 years, so do not feel obliged to spare my feelings if you identify flaws. I seek truth, not flattery. I confess I am skeptical of the stories I have heard, that you solve complex problems without formal training, that you visualize solutions mentally, but I'm curious enough to seek verification. If even half of what I have heard is true, you possess a remarkable gift. Turner's response, dated June 24, 1874, demonstrates both his technical acumen and his growing weariness with skepticism. Mr. Hoffman, I have reviewed your hull design. The modified bow will indeed reduce water resistance in calm conditions, but you are correct to worry about stability. In heavy seas, the narrow bow will dig into waves rather than riding over them, creating dangerous pitching motion. The vessel could broach, turn sideways to the waves, which can capsize a ship. To fix this, you need to adjust the bow's upward curve, making it more pronounced in the forward third of the hull. This will allow the bow to lift over waves rather than cutting through them. I have sketched the modification on your drawing and returned it. The mathematics of wave interaction with curved surfaces is complex, but the intuitive principle is simple. The bow needs to negotiate with the waves, not fight them. As for how I know this, I visualize the hull moving through water. I see the forces acting on it, the way water flows around it, the moments when resistance increases or decreases. This is not mystical or supernatural. It is simply how my mind works. I do not expect you to believe me, as nobody does until they see me work. But I am telling you the truth, as I understand it. I charge nothing for this consultation. I am trying to build a reputation so that someday people will trust my judgment without requiring proof each time. Perhaps if I help enough people, eventually someone will believe me when I say I see things others don't. Respectfully, Isaac Turner. Hoffman built the modified hull design. It performed exactly as Turner predicted. Hoffman's letter of thanks, dated September 3, 1874, includes an observation that many others would echo. You were right, and I should have trusted you from the start. But you must understand, what you claim defies explanation. We have no framework for understanding how a man can know things he was never taught. This makes us suspicious, even when the evidence of your abilities is undeniable. This was the paradox Turner faced repeatedly. His abilities were verifiable and valuable, yet their existence challenged foundational assumptions about how knowledge was acquired. For many white observers, especially in the South, accepting Turner's abilities as genuine required either abandoning beliefs about racial intellectual hierarchy or accepting explanations that positioned Turner as somehow unnatural, a prodigy so rare as to be almost supernatural, and therefore separate from the broader question of racial capacity. Tell us in the comments, when someone challenges everything we believe, why is it so hard to simply accept the evidence? The autumn of 1874 brought new challenges for Isaac Turner, but also an unexpected opportunity. Professor Edmund Hartley, who had continued to mentor Turner informally, arranged for him to present a paper at the annual meeting of the Virginia Academy of Science, a regional organization of scientists, engineers, and academics. The decision to invite Turner to present was controversial within the Academy. Several members threatened to boycott if a Negro was allowed to speak. But Hartley argued that scientific organizations should evaluate ideas on merit, regardless of the speaker's race. After heated debate, the Academy president agreed to allow Turner to present, though he would be the last speaker of the final session, a time slot that ensured minimal attendance. Turner's presentation, delivered on October 15, 1874, was titled "On the Visualization of Force and Motion in Mechanical Systems." The paper described his mental process for analyzing engineering problems, how he constructed three-dimensional mental models of machines, ran them through simulated operation in his imagination, and identified points of failure or inefficiency. No complete transcript of Turner's presentation survives, but several attendees documented their impressions. Professor Marcus Reed of the University of Virginia wrote in his journal, "I attended the Academy meeting's final session primarily out of curiosity about the Negro prodigy everyone has been discussing. I expected either a fraud or a savant, someone who could perform impressive calculations without understanding the principles behind them. What I encountered was something far more sophisticated." Turner described a cognitive process I can barely comprehend, a form of mental simulation where he models complex systems internally and observes their behavior as if watching a real machine operate. He claims this allows him to test designs mentally, identify flaws, and optimize performance without building physical prototypes. Most remarkably, he demonstrated this process in real time. An engineer in the audience presented a problematic valve design that had been causing failures. Turner studied it for perhaps 2 minutes, then described 3 separate design flaws and suggested modifications to address each one. He did this without paper, without calculations, simply by watching the valve operate in his mental model. The audience reaction was mixed. Some, like myself, were genuinely impressed by Turner's abilities and his articulate explanation of them. Others seemed disturbed, as if Turner's existence challenged something fundamental in their worldview. One gentleman left the hall in apparent disgust before Turner finished speaking. The most significant moment came during the question period. Dr. Harrison Blackwood of Richmond Medical College asked whether Turner believed his visualization abilities were a unique gift or a skill that could be taught. Turner's response was thoughtful. "Sir, I believe what I do is an extreme version of something everyone does to some degree. Everyone visualizes objects in their mind. I just do it with more detail and precision, and I can manipulate the visualizations mentally. Whether this is a gift I was born with or a skill I unknowingly developed, I cannot say. But I don't believe it's supernatural or impossible, just unusual." This answer seemed to satisfy some skeptics, though others remained visibly uncomfortable. After the presentation, several attendees approached Turner to discuss his ideas further. But just as many departed quickly, as if eager to distance themselves from whatever implications Turner's abilities carried. Turner's presentation should have marked a triumph, a formerly enslaved man presenting original research to a scientific academy, demonstrating abilities that earned respect from established scholars. Instead, it marked the beginning of a more systematic campaign to discredit or eliminate him. Within days of his presentation, anonymous articles began appearing in Richmond newspapers questioning Turner's character, his honesty, and his motives. Some accused him of plagiarizing ideas from white engineers. Others suggested he was being manipulated by northern radicals who wanted to use him as propaganda for racial equality. Still others hinted darkly that his abilities came from unnatural sources. An editorial in the Richmond Whig, dated October 22, 1874, exemplifies this backlash. The Turner question. The Negro Isaac Turner has become something of a celebrity, praised by some as a genius and viewed by others with suspicion. His recent presentation at the Virginia Academy of Science has reignited debate about his true nature and abilities. We acknowledge that Turner demonstrates unusual capabilities, but we question the interpretation of these capabilities. Is Turner truly a genius, or is he an extremely skilled mimic who has learned to replicate the language and methods of trained engineers without true understanding? Is he an honest man sharing genuine insights, or a fraud capitalizing on northern sympathy for the Negro race? Most troubling is the social disruption Turner causes. His presence in academic and professional settings creates confusion about proper boundaries between races. White students and engineers find themselves surpassed by a Negro, which undermines natural hierarchy and creates resentment. Turner may be blameless in his intentions, but his effect is corrosive to social order. We suggest that Turner would serve both himself and society better by exercising his abilities more privately, perhaps in service to white employers who can properly direct and supervise his work. Public displays of Negro intellectual superiority, even if genuine, serve no constructive purpose and only inflame racial tensions at a time when peace and order are desperately needed. The editorial's message was clear. Turner should make himself invisible, should subordinate his abilities to white authority, should accept a supporting rather than independent role. This was the price of tolerance in 1874 Virginia: competence without recognition, contribution without credit, utility without dignity. Turner, to his credit, refused this bargain. He continued to work independently, to accept consulting commissions, to file patent applications, and to speak publicly about his abilities. This defiance, for that is how many white Virginians viewed his simple insistence on existing openly, would have consequences. On November 8, 1874, Isaac Turner was attacked. The incident occurred near the tobacco warehouses along the James River in an industrial district where Turner had been consulting on warehouse ventilation design. He was walking alone at dusk when 3 men approached him. The men were never identified, witnesses gave conflicting descriptions, and no arrests were ever made. But all accounts agree the assault was deliberate, not a random act of violence. The police report, filed November 9th, describes Turner's injuries as severe contusions to the head and body, resulting from being beaten with clubs or similar weapons. He was found by a night watchman and taken to Richmond's Freedmen's Hospital, where he spent 4 days recovering. What makes this assault particularly significant is what happened immediately before it. A witness, a dock worker named Samuel Price, who was interviewed by police, reported hearing one of the attackers say, "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you're better than white men? We're going to teach you your place." The attack on Turner was, in essence, an assault on intelligence itself, a violent rejection of the idea that a black man could demonstrate superior mental capabilities. It was meant to reinforce through physical force what social pressure had failed to accomplish: Turner's silence and submission. During his recovery, Turner received visitors. Professor Hartley came, expressing outrage at the attack and offering to help prosecute the perpetrators, an offer that went nowhere as Richmond police showed little interest in pursuing the case. Margaret Ashford, the teacher who had first documented Turner's abilities, brought books and expressed sympathy. Several engineers and inventors who had benefited from Turner's consultations sent letters of support. But Turner also received letters of a different kind, anonymous notes warning him to leave Richmond. Messages saying the attack was just the beginning if he continued to step out of his place. One letter, preserved in Turner's personal papers, now housed at the Virginia State Archives, is particularly chilling. "Turner, you have been warned. A Negro who makes white men look foolish is a danger to everyone. Your so-called genius is nothing but arrogance and devilry. You were not beaten for no reason. You were beaten because you need to learn humility. Next time, the lesson will be more permanent. Leave Richmond, or you will not live to see another spring." The attack forced Turner to confront a reality that his abilities had perhaps allowed him to temporarily ignore. In 1874, Virginia, competence would not protect him. Success would not insulate him. In fact, his very excellence made him a target. The more he demonstrated his abilities, the more dangerous his existence became to a social order built on assumptions of black intellectual inferiority. Yet Turner did not leave Richmond. Instead, after his recovery, he did something remarkable. He doubled down on his public visibility. On December 1st, 1874, Turner published an essay in the Richmond Planet, one of the few black-owned newspapers in Virginia. The essay, titled "On Intelligence and Prejudice," represents Turner's most direct statement of his philosophy and his challenge to the society that sought to suppress him. "I am told I should hide my abilities, that I should work quietly and avoid drawing attention to myself. I'm told that my success makes white men uncomfortable, and therefore I should fail deliberately to preserve social harmony. I'm told that a Negro who demonstrates intelligence becomes a target for violence, and therefore I should feign stupidity for my own protection. I understand these arguments. I understand the danger I face by refusing to diminish myself. I carry the bruises from that danger still, but I will not hide what I am. I will not pretend to be less capable than I am. I will not accept that my intelligence, whatever its source, whatever its nature, is somehow a crime or a provocation. I did not choose to see numbers and forces in my mind. I did not decide to understand engineering principles without formal instruction. These abilities simply are as much a part of me as my hands or my eyes. To deny them would be to deny myself. Some say I am arrogant, that I overstep my station by claiming abilities equal to or greater than educated white men. But I make no claims beyond what I can demonstrate. I solve problems correctly. I design machines that work. I predict failures accurately. These are facts, not arrogance. If my abilities challenge your assumptions about race and intelligence, then perhaps your assumptions are wrong. If my existence makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps you should examine why competence in a Negro causes such discomfort. The problem is not my intelligence. The problem is your inability to accept it. I know this essay will make my situation more dangerous. I know I will be called uppity, rebellious, dangerous. But silence is its own form of death. I choose to speak, to work, to demonstrate what I can do, and to insist that my abilities be acknowledged regardless of my race. If this costs me my life, then at least I will have lived honestly rather than died slowly by pretending to be less than I am. The essay created exactly the firestorm Turner predicted. Some praised it as a courageous statement of dignity and self-worth. Others condemned it as inflammatory and dangerous. Several white-owned newspapers published editorials calling for Turner's expulsion from Virginia. The Richmond Times declared him a walking incitement to Negro arrogance and rebellion. But the essay also did something unexpected. It brought Turner to the attention of Northern audiences who had been largely unaware of his existence. On December 15, 1874, the New York Tribune published a feature article about Turner, describing him as a remarkable example of Negro capacity, whose abilities challenge prevailing assumptions about race and intelligence. The article quoted extensively from Turner's essay and from Professor Hartley's documentation of Turner's mathematical abilities. It concluded by suggesting that Turner represented evidence that the freed Negro population, given education and opportunity, might contribute to American progress in ways we have not yet imagined. The Tribune article changed Turner's situation in complex ways. It brought him national recognition and some measure of protection. Violence against a nationally known figure would attract unwanted attention. But it also intensified the resentment of those who viewed him as a threat. Turner became not just a local irritant, but a symbol in the larger national debate over Reconstruction, racial equality, and the future of the South. Through the winter of 1874-1875, Turner continued his work, but under increasingly difficult conditions. Some clients stopped hiring him under pressure from business associates or social peers. Others consulted him secretly, seeking his expertise while publicly distancing themselves from him. Turner found himself in the peculiar position of being simultaneously valued and reviled, his abilities acknowledged even by those who wished he did not exist. A letter from Turner to Professor Hartley, dated January 20, 1875, captures his state of mind during this period. "Professor, I confess I am weary, not of the work. I love the work, love the problems, love the feeling of seeing a solution emerge from chaos. But I am weary of fighting to be acknowledged, weary of proving myself repeatedly to skeptics, weary of receiving threats for simply existing as I am. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed quiet, should have hidden my abilities and lived a simple life. But then I think, what would that serve? Would my silence make racial prejudice disappear? Would my deliberate failure make white men suddenly accept Negroes as equals? Or would it simply be one more surrender, one more accommodation to injustice? I cannot control what others think of me. I cannot make them comfortable with my existence. All I can control is my own honesty, my own integrity, my own refusal to diminish myself for others' convenience. You asked me once whether I thought my abilities were a blessing or a curse. I have thought about that question often. They are both, I suppose. A blessing because they allow me to do work I find meaningful, to solve problems, to create things of value. A curse because they make me visible in a society that prefers Negroes to be invisible, make me threatening in a time and place that cannot tolerate a Negro who threatens white supremacy simply by being competent. But if I must choose between being blessed and cursed versus being nothing at all, I choose to be something, even if that something brings me trouble. Turner's determination to continue working publicly, despite the dangers, represents a form of quiet resistance that is easy to underestimate from our historical distance. In 1874, Virginia, with Reconstruction beginning to collapse, with racial violence escalating, with white supremacist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan operating openly, for a black man to insist on recognition, to refuse to hide his intelligence, to demand acknowledgement of his contributions, was an act of profound courage. But courage, however admirable, does not guarantee safety. On March 3, 1875, Isaac Turner disappeared. The circumstances are documented but remain murky. Turner had been hired to inspect a railway bridge outside Richmond, checking for stress fractures and design flaws. He departed Richmond on the morning of March 3rd, telling his landlady he would return that evening. He never arrived at the bridge site. The railway company that hired him reported he never appeared for the inspection. A missing person report was filed on March 5th. The investigation was perfunctory. A black man's disappearance did not warrant extensive police resources, especially when that black man had been publicly controversial. The police report simply notes, Isaac Turner, Negro, age 23, last seen March 3, 1875. Whereabouts unknown, investigation suspended due to lack of evidence. The immediate assumption among Turner's friends and supporters was foul play, that he had been kidnapped or killed by those who viewed him as a threat. Professor Hartley wrote to the Richmond police chief demanding a thorough investigation. Margaret Ashford organized a group of concerned citizens to search for Turner. The New York Tribune ran a follow-up article expressing concern about his disappearance, but no body was ever found, no witnesses came forward, no evidence of violence was discovered. Isaac Turner simply vanished. The historical record offers several theories, but no definitive answers. Theory 1. Turner was murdered, and his body disposed of in a way that left no trace. This is certainly possible. Disappearances of black men who challenged racial hierarchy were not uncommon in Reconstruction-era Virginia. The threats Turner had received, the previous assault, and the intensity of hostility toward him all support this theory. Theory 2. Turner fled Richmond voluntarily, recognizing that his life was in danger, and that remaining would result in his death. Some evidence supports this. A station master in Petersburg, Virginia, reported seeing a man matching Turner's description board a northbound train on March 4th, though he could not confirm the identification. If Turner fled, he may have started a new life elsewhere under a different name, deliberately severing all connections to his past to escape the danger his reputation had created. Theory 3. Whispered but never proven, Turner was kidnapped by parties who wanted to exploit his abilities in secret, removing him from public view while forcing him to work on projects for private gain. This theory has no documentary evidence, but persisted in oral histories and speculation. The truth remains unknown. What is documented is that after March 3, 1875, no reliable sighting of Isaac Turner was ever recorded. No letters in his handwriting appeared. No further patents were filed under his name. The man who had demonstrated abilities that seemed to exceed the bounds of normal human cognition simply ceased to exist in the historical record. In the months following his disappearance, several newspapers published obituaries or retrospectives on Turner's brief career. The Richmond Dispatch, which had been critical of Turner during his lifetime, published a surprisingly reflective piece on March 20th, 1875. The Fate of Isaac Turner. The disappearance of the Negro Prodigy. Isaac Turner brings an end to one of the most unusual and troubling chapters in recent Richmond history. Whether Turner met with foul play, fled for his safety, or suffered some other fate, we will likely never know. In retrospect, Turner's story raises uncomfortable questions about our society and its treatment of exceptional individuals who do not fit our expectations. Turner demonstrated abilities that, had he been white, would have earned him acclaim, university positions, and commercial success. Instead, he faced suspicion, hostility, and ultimately violence or disappearance. We do not suggest that Turner was without faults, or that his public assertions of equality were always wise given the realities of Southern society. But we are forced to acknowledge that a mind capable of genuine innovation was lost, either to violence, exile, or whatever fate befell him. And we must ask, how many other such minds have we lost by refusing to acknowledge ability where it appears, regardless of race? The question of Negro capacity remains contested, but Turner's case suggests that our assumptions may be more wrong than we wish to admit. And if we are wrong, what does that say about the social order we defend so vigorously? The editorial represented a crack in the ideological certainty that had characterized much of the white press's coverage of Turner. It was not an endorsement of racial equality. The language remains condescending and qualified, but it acknowledged what many had refused to admit, that Turner had been genuinely exceptional, and that his treatment and disappearance represented a loss. Professor Hartley continued searching for information about Turner's fate for years. His diary entries from 1875-1880 periodically mention following up on rumors. A brilliant black engineer in Chicago, a mathematical savant in Philadelphia, a mysterious inventor in Boston who matched Turner's description. None proved to be Turner. Hartley died in 1890, never knowing what became of his most extraordinary student. The patents Turner filed remained active, generating modest royalties that were held in trust by the Patent Office for several years before being declared abandoned. His cotton gin improvement was eventually purchased by a manufacturing company and used in mills throughout the South, though Turner's name was quietly removed from the marketing materials. His railway coupling design saved countless lives by reducing injuries to railway workers. His telegraphic relay contributed to improved long-distance communication. Turner's inventions had value. His ideas worked. His contributions mattered. But the man himself was erased, first through disappearance, then through the systematic removal of his name from the products and innovations he had created. There is one final document worth noting. A letter discovered in 1923 in the papers of a deceased Philadelphia physician named Dr. Marcus Reynolds. The letter is dated April 18, 1875, and was written by someone identifying himself only as IT. The handwriting has never been definitively verified as Turner's, as few exemplars of his handwriting survive, but the content is suggestive. Dr. Reynolds, thank you for agreeing to see me despite my unexpected arrival. As I explained, I cannot give you my full history or identity, as doing so would place both of us in danger. Suffice it to say I am a freedman from Virginia who found himself in circumstances that required immediate departure and complete separation from my previous life. I appreciate your offer of employment in your medical practice. However, I must decline any position that would require me to interact publicly with your patients or colleagues. I have learned that visibility is dangerous for someone like me. Instead, I ask only for occasional work that can be done privately, perhaps reviewing medical texts, solving diagnostic puzzles you encounter, or consulting on cases that present unusual challenges. I will charge modest fees and require only that my involvement remain confidential. You asked about my education and how I came to possess the medical knowledge I demonstrated during our conversation. I can only tell you that I see patterns in numbers, in forces, in the workings of the human body. This has always been so, and I have learned that such abilities, especially in a Negro, are best kept hidden. The world does not reward those who challenge its expectations. It punishes them. I have had my life threatened, my person assaulted, and ultimately had to flee everything I had built simply because I refused to pretend to be less than I was. I will not make that mistake again. From now on, I work in shadows, contribute without credit, and survive by being invisible. Perhaps this is cowardice. Perhaps I should continue to fight for recognition regardless of the cost. But I am tired of fighting, tired of proving myself, tired of watching men acknowledge my abilities with one breath and deny them with the next. If survival requires invisibility, then I choose survival. I hope you will respect my need for discretion and allow me to work quietly in service of your practice. I ask nothing more than the opportunity to use my abilities without the danger that public acknowledgement brings. Respectfully, IT. If this letter was indeed written by Isaac Turner, and it remains an unverified possibility, it suggests he survived his disappearance and built a new life in Philadelphia, working anonymously, contributing his abilities without seeking recognition. It is a sad ending for a man who had fought so hard for acknowledgement, to survive only by embracing the invisibility his society had always wanted to impose on him. But even if the letter is genuine, the larger questions remain. What was the source of Turner's extraordinary abilities? How did a man denied all formal education acquire knowledge that exceeded what trained professionals possessed? His claim that he saw patterns and visualized systems mentally is the closest he ever came to explaining his process. But it does not fully account for the specificity and sophistication of his knowledge. Some historians have suggested Turner possessed what we now recognize as a form of genius-level visual spatial intelligence, combined with exceptional mathematical intuition. Others have proposed he experienced a form of synesthesia that allowed him to perceive abstract concepts like force and motion in unusually concrete ways. Still others suggest he may have had access to education or technical documents in ways that were never documented, though this theory struggles to account for the breadth and depth of his knowledge. The truth is, we do not know. Turner's abilities, like the man himself, remain partially mysterious. What is not mysterious is the treatment he received. A society that needed black intellectual inferiority to justify its racial hierarchy could not tolerate evidence of black brilliance. Turner's very existence challenged foundational assumptions, and therefore he had to be discredited, dismissed, or destroyed. The case of Isaac Turner stands as a testament to both human potential and human cruelty. A mind capable of genuine innovation was either killed or driven into hiding because the society around it could not accept what it represented. Turner's contributions, his inventions, his insights, his demonstrations of exceptional ability should have been celebrated. Instead, they were treated as threats. How many other Isaac Turners existed in the decades following slavery? How many brilliant minds emerged from bondage only to be suppressed, erased, or destroyed because their abilities challenged racial ideology? The historical record preserves only those cases where documentation survived, typically those involving white witnesses whose observations created archival evidence. But for every documented case, how many went unrecorded? The greatest tragedy of Turner's story is not what happened to him, terrible as that likely was, but what did not happen. He was never given the opportunity to reach his full potential. His abilities were never fully utilized for the benefit of society. His innovations were stripped of his name, his contributions acknowledged only when his identity could be erased. Isaac Turner was brilliant. The evidence is overwhelming, but brilliance alone cannot overcome systematic oppression. Intelligence cannot shield against violence. Genius cannot break barriers that an entire society conspires to maintain. Turner's story asks us to consider not just what we lost when he disappeared, but what we continue to lose whenever we allow prejudice to determine whose abilities we acknowledge, whose contributions we celebrate, and whose voices we permit to be heard. The barriers Turner tried to break remain, in modified forms, to this day. Somewhere, in an unmarked grave or in the anonymous spaces of a forgotten life, Isaac Turner rests. His ultimate fate unknown, his final years undocumented, his story incomplete, but the evidence of his extraordinary mind survives in patent records and witness testimonies, in letters and diary entries, in the grudging acknowledgments of those who could not deny what they had seen, even when they wished they could. He was a prodigy who outsmarted his era, but his era destroyed him anyway, or forced him to destroy himself by becoming invisible. That is the legacy of 1874, not what was possible, but what was not permitted. If this story challenged you, disturbed you, or made you think about who we remember and who we erase, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, history is written by those who survive to tell it. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that almost disappeared forever.